Hi, everybody. I'm Bill, and I'm going to be your host slash facilitator today. So we'll get started as we let people file in. And we are in webinar format today. And so that means you'll have a few options for interacting. And we're going to start off in presentation mode. I promise not to go on too long, and then we'll have a chance to have a bit of a breakout. We'll have slightly smaller groups with some conversation. Oh, the host muted me.
Oh no.
There we go. All good? Okay. All right. One thing, you can send some messages. I think by the, do we have the Q&A? You might see a Q&A. So feel free to use that. There are about 41 of us, and we know that just about 70 people or so have registered. So I'll wait one more minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming. Very much appreciate it. I'll do a little bit of a preamble and talk a little about the format of these 4 sessions across all the Fridays in February, which is the plan. So today is session 1, and we have planned for each of the Friday brown bag sessions to take 1 hour of your time. And you can join any or all of them. Recommend that you consider at least coming back, and we'll see if this first one entices you to do so. And the sessions have been designed to build on one another. But if you miss the first one, don't worry. Or if you have someone on your team that you would like to bring along, or a colleague, because Peggy and the great folks here at HWW who are behind the scenes are going to edit this session, and we're going to post a version of it as a recording. So you'll be able to watch again or share it with one of your colleagues, and they can catch up and join us next week if they would like to. Because I'd like to keep it to an hour, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll get started. Thank you once again to all the folks at HWW. And bear with me one second while we do this little business. And here we are. So the theme of today and of the session generally, I like to call charting pathways to intellectual leadership. And the reason for that will become obvious, but I want to give a special thanks to Antoinette and Jason, who are our fearless leaders in the Humanities Without Walls Consortium, to all of my colleagues who are also campus liaisons as part of HWW, and to all of you for helping us think through this idea of how we can make the practice of seeking support for our research, which is what we're here to talk about today, part of a broader picture of how our career develops over time, and how we can keep our focus on the things that are important to us, that are centered in our values, and that are serving our intellectual goals rather than the other way around. It can sometimes feel like you're just chasing instead of using these opportunities to forward the goals that we have as scholars, and that's what we want to try to do today. So I'm going to kind of tell you about the focus for today. And in the weeks ahead, you see parts 2, 3, and 4. That's what we'll be doing in each of the next 4 sessions. Some of you might have taken this path before, but I'll talk a little bit about why that won't be a problem. Charting your path to intellectual leadership is today, and you can think of that as goal setting. We're going to be doing some goal setting. I want to give you a heads up because we're going to ask you some questions that are that take some deep thought and some commitment to answer. And I say that feeling all of those things myself. When I think about asking others to frame these questions, of course, I think about them too for my own career, and they are never easy to answer. So these are not the kind of things you can just spit out an answer to. And that's okay, because part of what we're trying to do here is, across all 4 sessions, is introduce another idea, which is grant seeking and this kind of deliberate goal setting as a way to guide your career is a practice. A practice like a yoga practice. Take some calm and meditation and mindfulness. It's a practice like a music practice or a dance practice. You don't get better at it right away. And it takes a bit of patience as we're going through. But if you are dedicated to it, you can get better. And you can get better in ways that are satisfying and also beneficial to your career. So that's kind of what we're after. All right, so let's get into it. For each of the sessions, I've built the exercise or the practice around a question that I hope the session will answer for you. So this is your way to tell I'm doing what I hope to do, because by the end, or at least maybe sometime early next week, after this has all sunk in, you'll have a way to answer question number 1. That's what we're going to do today. My question back to you is, what other questions that are not listed here do you have, or does this make you think about? But that's the one I'm going to focus on today. And in my job, which I'll tell you about in a minute, I often work with faculty and also graduate students early in their career, faculty all the way through their career. And I often get a version of number 1, which is now the right time for me to go for a grant? And I think this is actually something that holds people back from submitting. If you aren't 100% sure that now is the right time, then writing a grant or seeking funding, going into all of that involves to get a fellowship or whatever it might be, means allocating your time away from something else you could be doing and that might be more beneficial to your career at that time. And so that's why we tackled this question first, and then we build. So we'll come back to the other questions in each of the successive weeks. All right, and now a little bit about me. This is just my attempt to say why you might want to listen. Who is this guy? So I'm a professor at Michigan State in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures. And I'm also Associate Dean for Research and Graduate Education in the College of Arts and Letters at MSU. I've been at MSU for 15 years. This is my 16th year, and I have been in the Dean's office for 6 years, in this combined role for about 3 years. In my own work, I study over the arc of my career. I'm at that 20-year mark past my graduation with my PhD. I study writing behaviors and practice inside and outside of school settings, and generally I am an interventionist. I try to help people improve whatever else they're doing by improving their writing. And lately, I would say, it's getting long now, but the last 10 or 12 years, I've focused mostly on healthcare settings. So I work with care providers, and through improving their written communication, usually between and among one another, but also sometimes with patients, we try to improve the outcomes of patient care. And that's where my own work has focused. I also have some other projects that are close to that follow the things that are in this next bullet, which is, generally speaking, I work at the intersection of written communication and user experience. And so that's me. I'll talk about why that's interesting and why that might be a component when we do an example. And I think having an ability to say what your work is about and where your interests lie in this way is part of that process of setting goals for yourself, because you have to often decide, am I going further along a path, or am I going to take a different path at this stage? One other thing that might be interesting to you is early in my career, I studied grant-seeking teams with two other colleagues of mine around the country, and we studied them in different kinds of academic and nonprofit and government agencies. And we deliberately picked really successful grant-seeking organizations in order to try to find out what helped them succeed. And so part of what you're going to see today, or what I'm going to talk to you about today, comes from that. And actually all the way through. Most of that actually will surface next week. A lot of that original research is featured there. Okay, so that's me. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about this framework. This is the thing that we can come back to if we have questions in the Q&A. This is the thing that requires the most unpacking. And I'm going to show it to you. Some of you may have seen this before, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it as a way to anchor the perspective that I'm going to ask you to adopt on setting goals for yourself. So in the middle circle here is this concept of intellectual leadership. And what I would like you to imagine is that this, over the arc of your full career, is something like what we are all aspiring to when we work in institutions of higher education. It's what those institutions and their mission permits us to name as the kind of main goal. And remarkably, it can do that across lots of different institutional roles, because we work in learning institutions that are designed to contribute knowledge to the world. At their best, they encourage all of us who work there to be part of that mission. And so whether or not you take up a position where you're recognized with a title, like associate dean or whatever, intellectual leadership is something that can manifest as a component of your day-to-day life. So you want to be recognized by your colleagues or by your students as somebody from whom it's worthwhile to learn. And the way that you do that is represented in the circles on this chart. So the circles are the sort of the ends towards which we work in any given day. We work to share our knowledge, to expand opportunity for other people, and to engage in mentorship and stewardship, by which I mean invest in the success of other people through either directly as an individual or through the programs, institutes, etc., that we have created. Now, the interesting thing about this, there's a bit of, we hope, a positive subversive nature of this chart. And that is, the ovals on this chart are the traditional things by which we're often measured on the tenure track, at least, in faculty roles at the institution of higher ed where most of us work, teaching, research, and service. But what we're trying to suggest here is that those are means and not ends. And it doesn't make sense for us to orient our goals by talking about the means. That's like saying, where are you headed when you see somebody walking down the street and they say, I'm stepping. I'm putting one foot in front of the other. Well, no, that's how you're doing it, but where are you going? And so, for example, when we're sharing knowledge, turns out you can share knowledge by teaching or doing research or publishing, right? And we shouldn't necessarily think about one versus the other as the only thing that we're concerned with. This will come into play when we talk about the arc of a project and how a project grows from one thing to the next. It might start out that you're sharing knowledge in publications, but as that idea grows, it might be something that other people want to teach in their program. And so all of a sudden now you're thinking about, well, how would we teach that to students? And it could be part of the very same project, sharing that knowledge more broadly. So we're going to ask you to think about those things rather in the circles, and they'll come back in just a minute, rather than thinking about just the ovals. And spoiler alert, grant seeking, for the most part, I tend to put in the lower right-hand part of this graph, or of this little Venn diagram. That is why what are we doing when we're seeking grant funds or grant resources? Why do we do it? Well, usually it's because we're trying to expand opportunity for more than just ourselves. And that could mean that we want to expand the opportunity to participate in the work, that is, grow a team or build a group of people or facilitate more folks lending a hand in a project. Or it could mean that you want your project to go further in a different format and reach more people, so that the opportunity to experience it comes to more than just the people in your immediate institution or research group or whatever it might be. So expanding the opportunity for other people to see or experience or participate is generally the reason why we're seeking resources. In the humanities and arts, where I work and where maybe many work, there are a significant portion of us for whom expanding opportunity beyond ourselves is something of an option rather than a requirement. That is, it's possible in some cases for you to make a perfectly fine career on your own. And for other people, it might not be. It might be that the nature of the work that you're pursuing, you actually need to involve other people. And because of that, you're going to need resources beyond your immediate salary and support that your institution provides you in order to scaffold and provide opportunities for participation. So that's one of the goals that you'll have to think about right up front, is what are the circumstances under which you find yourself looking for resources. The other thing that you'll often have to do, and this is why I bring up that question of it being optional at this time for you in your career or required in order to move forward, is the other circles here are also competing interests to some degree. In other words, you can, depending on where your project is, you can often have a genuine question. Is it more important for me to focus on sharing knowledge, or is it more important for me to take the opportunity I've been offered to be a program director or a department chair right now, engaging more of my time as mentor and steward of the programs in our department? Or is it more important for me to do something in one of these other areas? That finite resource of your attention and focus and time is part of what makes that a difficult decision. And so we're going to talk a little bit about those things in the breakout here in a minute. I want to call your attention to one final component of the diagram here, and that is the value labels that lie on the outside. So here's how I like to encourage people to read this. It's kind of a vision of how, when we're at our best in institutions of higher education, how we can encourage professional growth and intellectual leadership, and also work to make our institutional environments emulate those values that you see on the outside. So for example, as more people are sharing knowledge, engaging in mentorship and stewardship, we see that our institutions are more reciprocal and more equitable, working and learning spaces. The more people value and do those things, that's how those values manifest. Same thing on the other side. If we value transparency, we're going to share what we know rather than hold it close. If we're going to be expanding creativity, we're also going to be opening new possibilities all the time. We're going to be looking for ways for other people to experience and participate. So if you are aligned with these values and you want your organizations to manifest them, the work of that, we think, lies in the circles that you see here. So this is where I would ask you in a minute to orient your own goals. You should have some goals in each of the circles. So that's a teaser. And I'm going to talk, let me set that up, and then we'll move to the conversation. So I'm going to break it down a little bit more simply right now. You can see my little garden path, and you see our Venn diagram now is transparent. Here's how we like to get people thinking. Imagine yourself as an intellectual leader. You might be one now. Most of you probably are. And all it takes for you to be one is that someone recognizes you as someone worthy of listening to, of learning from. We're not talking about a formal position of leadership necessarily, although that might be one of the things that you aspire to. But I want you, just in your heart of hearts, you don't have to share it yet, imagine yourself in a moment, a horizon, an event out there on the time horizon that represents a new space for you as an intellectual leader, a place that you would like to try to arrive. And I want you to imagine in as richly as you can the circumstances of that event. Place yourself in that moment if you can. How would you know? What would signal your arrival in that moment of intellectual leadership? Is it an email that you get one day from your dean? Is it an award that you receive? Is it the moment that your book arrives in the mail? It's going to be personal for everyone. Is it the day that your exhibition hangs in a museum and your family is there to see it for the first time? Is it the first time your film screens at a real theater with people in there eating popcorn and watching your movie? What is that moment for you? Okay, so that's a horizon event. Now, let's work backwards from there and do some planning. There are two ways that we can envision the incremental progress we might make towards our horizon event. And I put them on the list, and I want to talk about them briefly, but I want you to focus more on stepping stones than milestones, and here's why. It can be really easy to focus on milestones because they are often the official waypoints that we are given. On the tenure track in higher ed, these milestones are sometimes they seem like big, heavy rocks. But there's a problem with that. They mark someone else's path, first of all. That is, someone else put them there. They may have put them there to guide you, but you didn't determine the path. You're just sort of encountering them as you go. You also can't do anything about them most of the time. And I'll talk about that in a second. Stepping stones, on the other hand, metaphorically is a different thing. These are the intentional decisions that you can make to move towards your horizon. Does that make sense? So a stepping stone, well, let me put it this way. A milestone might be getting a grant funded. That's a great moment, but you can't control it. A stepping stone is submitting the grant application. So that is what you want to focus your attention on, because it's something that you can control and it belongs on your to-do list while the milestone does not. It's not wrong to chart the milestones because you want to know where they are, and they are useful for telling you your progress. But the stepping stones are the things that matter the most. Now back to the diagram for a second. As you're moving through your horizon, toward your horizon event, you'll notice that the path winds a little bit, right? Be open to where it takes you. That is, which of these circle areas do you need to go to get to your destination? So let's look at an example, and then I'm going to ask you, here's your warning. I'm going to ask you to do this. Choose a horizon. Imagine some milestones and stepping stones. But first, I have one, just like a cooking show, baked and all ready to come out of the oven, golden brown and delicious. This one that came from my own career early in my life. So, horizon event. Let's narrate it. This is what the first thing I'll ask you to do in your breakout sessions is try to narrate a moment like this. And let me just be honest. Just saying it now, this one is in my rearview mirror now. But it makes me a little nervous just to say it now. So I want to acknowledge it's not easy to do, and it feels, I don't know, feels presumptuous. But here goes. In 5 years' time, I once said to myself, I will be asked to be a program chair for the HWW conference, which is a big conference in my sub-area, Association of Teachers of Technical Writing. Because having attended that meeting, I always thought that's a pretty cool thing to do. The person who does that has been recognized by their peers, has been entrusted by their peers to sort of set the research agenda and themes for the whole year, really, to set in motion what would be important topics to talk about and to invite big name speakers to focus on that. And that's a really interesting moment of shaping the discourse of a particular area. And I think that would be a really interesting thing, to be at that podium, welcoming people to that conference, reading that theme statement and saying, here's what we're going to talk about for the next 2 days as a field. So that's the horizon event. How do I get there now? Okay, so most of these things are articulated as stepping stones, right? The one thing that's out of my control is actually being asked to do that, right? So that's a milestone event that I'm not gonna worry about. But I am gonna say, well, what can I do that make the chances for me to do that more likely? So one is, I knew I could submit an article to the journal, and I could submit conference presentations or proposals to the conference each year. So be a presence in that professional organization, become recognized as someone who's contributing to that professional discourse seems like the thing to do. That also meant focusing there, maybe. So if I was reading calls for papers and going, should I submit to that special collection? No, I want to submit to the TCQ journal. That's my goal. So I'm actually choosing some paths and not others, right? Not chasing, but deliberately planning. Then I found out a really interesting thing by asking people, hey, how does this happen? And that is that if I was able to run for office, an at-large position on the executive committee, it turns out that every other year they ask the at-large representatives to be the conference chair. So all of a sudden, hey, there's a shortcut in my path. I should consider that. Maybe I will run for that office. And then finally, be a presence at the conference itself. So it turns out that at the conference registration table were all the officers and executive committee members. And all I had to do to get to know them and ask them questions about how the conference works and how somebody, gets to that position was volunteer to hand people lanyards and, give them a program. I spent 3 hours at the registration desk as an early career faculty member and got to know all of these wonderful senior members of my field. And of course, I got to welcome all the people coming as well. And that might be something you write off as just service. And it could be just service in other contexts. But in that moment, in the context of my stepping stones, it made a lot of sense. So that's what I would ask you to think about as an example. Okay, are we ready to try one on our own? Here's what I would like you to do. Share a plan. Your plan will have these components: a horizon event. So go around in your group and narrate your horizon. In 5 years' time, in 2 years' time, etc. And then talk a little bit about, you can help each other with this part. What are your stepping stones and milestones? And when you've got that a little bit sketched out, the question that I'm really interested in hearing is, where will your actions take you? Are you surprised to learn by where they are? Like, do they take you into areas of intellectual activity that maybe you hadn't thought about? Interested to hear that. Are we ready to try it? I'm going to stop sharing. And I'm going to try, we'll see how this goes, to put us into breakout rooms. Anybody want to share their brief narration of their Horizon event?
My Horizon event is an uplifting performance by people of color where I am nowhere to be seen.
Nice. Okay. What kind of performance are we thinking about?
Oh, it's an idea. It's about themes like police, like travel, like home, that have different meanings among communities of color, and they're not all the same even among them, that are sidelined in our dominant narrative, and bringing those narratives to the center, and also increasing solidarity and sharing of histories. That's kind of
okay. So talks, public, academic.
No, I'm not thinking that. I'm thinking community-based. I hate to use this analogy, but vagina monologues until I can come up with a better
Gotcha.
Community performances. I'm not there at all.
Okay.
Developing performative talents among communities of color.
Got it.
Or so unleashing. I'm sure they're already developed. Unleashing them.
Got it. A kind of publicly engaged moment that can recur.
Yes.
Nice. Exciting. That's a good one. And I think it's one for this reason. It's one that you couldn't pull off alone by its very nature. You defined that at the beginning. And so you would need some cooperation, some help. You would need to build some relationships as well as have some resources to make it happen. Great example. That is an example of what I call lifting your gaze when we're talking about these stepping stones and milestones. Academia has a funny way of making us look at our feet, counting our steps so that you can put them on your annual review. And I want you, for this exercise at least, to give yourself permission to look way out there. Set some goals that maybe exceed your own capacity, because that's usually where the answer to your question, is this the right time to go after some grant funding? That's when the answer is yes. If you can't pull it off alone or with the immediate resources you have access to, that's when the answer is yes. If it's not, then it's just a matter of reallocating or rearranging the resources you have so that priority is aligned with what you want to do. So when I spoke with Peggy about this, we first talked about a goal that's pretty close. And so she has a to-do list now of things she can actually do on her own. And she won't have to write a grant to do them. Not yet, anyway. But then we dreamed a little bigger. And she's got one of those too. And that's going to be the homework. Does that make sense? Let me go back to my slides really quickly because we're almost done for today. let's see. I think I first have to share again. Here we go. So thanks for engaging in this exercise. It's the kind of thing that I encourage people to do routinely. I think it's important to do throughout your career. You never age out of this sort of feeling like you need to stretch a little bit more or plan a little bit more carefully. But there are times when it feels like you're being tugged along rather than moving intentionally. And this is what I personally use to try to recover that feeling of agency about my own career development. But I think it's also useful for trying to understand how we might diversify the actions that we're thinking about. These are some of the things I'd like you to think about as you do this on your own. So your homework for next time, especially if you're coming back, is I would like you to start the next hour of our planning time together with a horizon event that you would need to seek grant funding for, or some kind of fellowship. Maybe it's to buy your time, whatever it might be. You don't have to be too specific about that, but you know that it's audacious enough that you couldn't pull it off alone or with the resources you currently have. So you would need help, time, money, whatever it might be, space. So that's what I'd like you to try to do. Use the same technique for next week. And here are some of the discussion points you might have with one another, with some of your colleagues, or even upon reflection. And I'd welcome your thoughts about this, but I wanted to leave you with some things to reflect on. When we talk about intellectual leadership, one of the things that it does is a kind of shift. We no longer think about publication, for example, as the end goal. It never was. We obviously want people to read our publication, so it's not the end of it. And beyond that, we want them to use it and think about it, maybe write something of their own or share it with someone. Publications are a means and not an end. So what comes after that? Like, allow yourself to dream about what happens when someone gets it in their hands and says, yes, what then? When you're choosing your ways to spend your time, don't think about doing service, think about opportunities to lead or to learn. Your career work is going to include building relationships as well as building knowledge. That example I talked about of working at the registration desk is a good example of bullet 2 and 3 working together. Yes, it was 3 hours of my time to give people badges, but more importantly, I got to meet all these wonderful mentors, senior people in my field who continue to help me to this day. As you move from early to mid-career to late career, your priorities tend to shift. And for me, what that has looked like is it's more important to me now than it was 20 years ago to invest in the success of other people. Not only because that feels like the right thing to do, it does, but also because that's the key to my own growth. That is, I've achieved almost all I can achieve by investing only in me. My future success involves investing in others. I can't grow nearly as much as if all of these wonderful people who I help also succeed. Then our possibilities are truly amazing. And seeing that that's not a drain on my time, but that is the best way to spend my time is eye-opening. And finally, I hope that today you did two things. One is you got an answer to that question of how do I know it's the right time to go after some funding, or how can I know it's the right time? And also a sense that teaching, mentoring, research, they don't have to pull you in opposite directions all the time. You can see a path in which they're integrated and coherent. Sometimes it takes some work, On any given Tuesday, you're going to feel tugged in one direction or another. But maybe over weeks and months, you can make it make sense in a way that's fulfilling and get you through that tough Tuesday when you have a stack of papers to grade or something like that. It is 2:00. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you for spending this hour with me today. And I hope that you'll join us next week.